Everyone is hating on Kraven right now, and don't get me wrong, it is definitely a bad movie, but there's still a part of me that kind of likes it, so let's talk about it. Now, as always, if you want to see what I gave this movie out of 10, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. And if you've already seen the movie, let me know your thoughts on it in the comments. But without further ado, let's talk about the final Sonyverse movie, thank God, Kraven the Hunter. So in the last entry of Sony's Spider-Man universe that doesn't have Spider-Man, we follow Sergei Kravinoff, who is played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, and his journey as he becomes known as Kraven the Hunter. Jumping right into the good, and there wasn't much good in this movie, let's be honest, but there is one thing that I think this movie did genuinely well, and it was fun to watch in this as well, and that is the action/fight scenes. Now, the action and fight scenes were the sole reason that this movie was rated R because they were bloody, gory, and insanely gruesome. I'm talking bear traps to the head, Kraven biting off body parts, and one guy even got like split in half / exploded, I guess, from one of Kraven's traps. I mean, some of the ways that the bad guys died in this movie was pretty disturbing at times, but it was also pretty entertaining. I did like the animalistic fighting style we got from Kraven in this, but that was about the only comic accurate thing about him in this movie. Overall, we got some pretty cool action sequences outside of that final battle between Rhino and Kraven, which I thought was pretty weak. But the fight scenes are really the reason why. There's a little part of me that still kind of likes this movie because I would watch a fight scene and be like, oh, am I starting to like this movie? But then obviously I would get right to the next scene and be like, oh no, this movie still sucks. Next up for the good, and yes, believe it or not, I think this movie did two things well, and that is what they did with the Chameleon. Now, all of the side characters in this movie were pretty uninteresting overall, except for Kraven's brother Dimitri, who is the Chameleon. He was really the only character outside of Kraven that had any type of character arc in this movie. They built him up throughout this entire film and definitely made it known that he was going to be the Chameleon by the end of this film. They talk about how he's good at blending in and then literally just have his dad mention that he's good at mimicking voices and then just straight up calls him the Chameleon. We see that throughout the movie, his father's approval means a lot to him and he never really gets that, so he feels overlooked because his older brother Kraven is obviously the favorite child. So we see that kind of build throughout the movie of him feeling unseen, and it spills over into him becoming the Chameleon by the end of this film. And I have to say, once we do finally get to see him at the end of this movie, he looks really cool. But the sad part about that is we're never going to see him again because this is the last Sonyverse movie. So even though I think they did a solid job at building him up in this film, it just feels like we wasted a really cool Spider-Man character on this movie, which sucks. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is what they did with the character of Kraven. Now, I thought Aaron Taylor Johnson was fine as Kraven. I have no complaints with his performance. He worked with what he had, and he gave us some cool action sequences and also added his own flair to the character as well. My biggest problem with his character was that it just felt like the complete opposite from the comic book version of the character. Kraven is known for loving the hunt. He wants the biggest and best prey, no matter who it is, and he wants to hunt them down. And that's why Spider-Man is his biggest foe. And on top of that, Kraven is a straight up villain. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But in this movie, he wasn't even an anti-hero. He was a straight up superhero with morals and everything. So even though they dressed him up like Kraven, he fought like Kraven, at the end of the day, it just didn't feel like Kraven because he was missing those characteristics. Finally, getting into the bad, and the first thing I have here is that the dialogue and ADR were atrocious. And I may go as far to say that it was just as bad, if not worse, than Madam Web at times. This dialogue is going to make you cringe, and I even felt bad for the actors at times because this movie had some really talented actors in it, but the dialogue that they had to say made it seem like this was their first major role. Then we have the ADR, and I don't know if I saw this right, but I swear at one point in this movie, they CGI'd the lips of a character to make it match what they were saying in the ADR. And for those of you who may not know what ADR means, it stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement, and this is what happens after the movie is already shot and they have the actors come in and re-record their lines so they can change what they said when the scene was initially shot. But anyways, the ADR in this was so noticeable that it was distracting throughout this entire thing, and the audio sounded so much different when they did use it from when they weren't using it. You could clearly tell that what you were hearing was not what the actors were actually saying, and that was probably the most annoying part about this entire film. Next up for the bad, I have the story, and the plot in this movie does not get going until like halfway through this thing when a certain something happens. In the beginning, we spend a solid half hour with Kraven as a kid as we learn his origin story, and honestly, this part of the movie could have easily been 5 to maybe 10 minutes tops. And once we get past that part, it seems like this movie is going to go in a certain direction. Essentially, Kraven has this list of people that he wants to hunt down, so you're like, okay, this whole movie is going to be Kraven crossing off these names on the list. I can get on board with that. But then they completely abandon that plot and go in this other direction once a certain event happens halfway through this movie. So essentially it just kind of felt like we were dilly-dallying around for like the first hour of this movie until they finally decided to get things going with the actual plot. And finally, for the bad, I have the Rhino. Now, I think Alessandro Nivola was fine as the Rhino. It looked like he was having fun playing the role, and he was definitely more on the cartoony side with this character. And there are actually a couple of moments with him that will probably make you laugh just because of how cartoony he is as a villain in this thing. But what I hated most about Rhino was his design in the final battle of this movie. Now, I don't usually harp on the design of comic book characters in movies. I can usually get past it, but this one was so bad that I audibly said, man, he looks terrible when I finally saw Rhino in his full form in this film. The best way I can describe him is that he looked like a CGI rock with a face and horns on his head with T-Rex arms and super skinny legs. Now, I am all for a comic accurate Rhino, but for this one, they missed the mark in my opinion. But overall, this is just another bad movie in Sony's Spider-Man universe. It's got some solid action, but that's about it. This is 100% a movie that you can skip and wait for it to hit streaming because, let's be honest, it's going to be there pretty soon. Those were my thoughts on Kraven the Hunter. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shop easyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.